Thank you everyone for coming tonight. Before I introduce Nettie, I would like to acknowledge that I am currently situated on unceded Squamish territory, otherwise known as Bowen Island. And the host of this talk, who is Ladysmith Waterfront Art Gallery, is situated on Stamanis territory. I am incredibly privileged to be able to work and play here every day. My name is Sarah, as you've heard from Francesca, and I'm an intern here at the Ladysmith Waterfront Gallery, and I'll be hosting tonight's talk with Nettie. So tonight we are incredibly honored to speak with one of Canada's leading documentary filmmakers, Nettie Wild. Nettie's films have traveled the world and have brought her audiences behind the front lines and headlines of revolutions and social change. Her more recent work has gained recognition for forging new frontiers in storytelling on the big screen, on the web, and in massive public installations. Hello, Nettie. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking me.
And I'm going to show a short video, but I'm just going to introduce it first so we kind of know what we're looking at. So tonight's talk will be focused on Nettie's newest iteration of Uninterrupted. In 2017, Uninterrupted was a site-specific public art event. This summer, across the Lower Mainland, Uninterrupted is a synchronized VR event which places you in the middle of a unique experience, a wild, wondrous river and salmon swimming a city bridge, where you can be immersed in the timeless nature of salmon migration without leaving your seat. Is there anything you'd like to say about the project before I show the video, Nettie?
Well, what you'll see in the video is a kind of time lapse of us creating the original art piece in 2017, in which we took 4 years of footage we shot of the salmon migration and projected it onto the pillars and the underbelly of the Cambie Street Bridge. And that was a kind of lovely hallucinogenic journey, which played every night for the summer of 2017. It was 24 minutes long. And we had we started with 400 people a night. By the time we entered our third month, we were playing to an average of 1,000 people a night. And the closing night, we had 1,800 people there. So 30,000 people saw it, all told. And then we wanted to bring it back to the Cambie Street Bridge. And then we got hit by COVID, along with all the rest of us. And so we thought, you know, what would be an interesting thing to do would be to put Uninterrupted into virtual reality, so that, in fact, the bridge and the fish are liberated from the bridge, from the site-specific location, and can travel with the headsets to whatever community. And that's what we're doing right now in Vancouver. We're having a series of screenings, 4 screenings a night throughout the entire summer, touring around to different locations at 2 weeks apiece. So we're now on our second to last location, and on the 17th we'll open in downtown Vancouver and play for 2 weeks, and that'll be our tour. And it's, you know, allowed us to take that piece and then play in virtual reality and explore how to make it an immersive 3D experience, which was really fun. So what you'll see in this film is the kind of build of the first initial piece.
Nettie, if you could explain what the story of how Interrupted began was and how the project has ended up utilizing VR, because I think you edited it in VR in the very beginning. Is that correct?
I did. I mean, when we first started with Uninterrupted, the whole process started on the banks of the Adams River. When I went up in 2010, I don't know if you remember, in 2010 there was a huge migration of sockeye that headed up the Fraser River. There were, what was it? I can't remember this. There were millions and millions and millions of salmon, and 6 million of them were headed for the Adams River alone, which is the home of the biggest salmon sockeye spawn in the world. And I went up and saw this, and I was on the banks of the river, and I looked down into all the braids that were feeding in at the mouth of the river, and they were choked with salmon. But as the salmon were waiting to go up, they were circling because there were so many, they couldn't all get up the river at the same time. And standing on the banks of the river and looking down, it was like I was looking at colossal moving abstract art. It's the only way I can describe it. It was all these patterns, but none of them repeated themselves. And I came back down to Vancouver, and I was talking to my good friend and colleague and editor, Michael Brockington, and I just said, whoa, like, I'd love to do something around this. I was really moved by it. But it's not, I don't think it's a movie. And at that time, there was a lot of digital mapping happening in Europe, where the party trick was you could make, the Louvre look like it was falling down or something, where they project these extraordinary images. And we thought, and we ran around the city of Vancouver, and there was a lot of buildings with green glass. So, that wasn't going to work until we bicycled past the Cambie Street Bridge, which is this vast expanse of gray concrete, which happens to be 17% gray, which just happens to be, in case you don't know, I didn't at the time, it is the perfect color to project onto. And it's vast. And we just went, holy smokes, this is what we're going to do. We're going to create this crazy idea and make fish swim across the Cambie Street Bridge. While we were creating this show, so if you can imagine that those images that we had shot in the river were now going to be 30 feet tall and span a kilometer. And so there was a certain point when we're editing everything and trying to imagine it, we've got this computer generated bridge, and we've got that on our flat screen, and we're saying, okay, that fish is going to swim on that pillar over there. But there's a certain point when you get to what would normally be a rough cut stage in a documentary where you go, we have to know what this feels like. Like, how about if that fish is moving too fast? How about if it scares people? How about if it makes people nauseous? Like, how do we know? And so we lugged a couple of projectors down under the bridge to take a look, and it was ridiculous. It was like, we needed everything to be in place in order to see if it worked, but we couldn't afford to install the whole finished installation. So we were stuck, and somebody had the foresight, and it certainly wasn't me, to get a virtual reality plug-in into our editing system. And we plugged the headsets in and took a look at what our show looked like in VR. And this was very rudimentary VR. It was nothing like what we're showing now. It was beautiful. It was just really pretty in there. It was just like sapphires. And we just went, ooh. and the thing that's really amazing inside the VR headsets is that the blacks are true blacks, and the colors are really, really vital. When you're projecting onto a bridge, you're dealing with the ambient light of an entire city chugging away. There's city lights and boat lights and headlights and all the rest of it. And it was great because it was huge, but we always fight against the thief of the ambient light of the city, which could steal the power from our images. And same thing with our sound. We had to be very careful of our neighbors, and not disturb them and keep the soundtrack at a certain level. But on the headsets, we've got the images are right here and the sound is right here and the movie's happening in your own head. It's very immediate. And so we made a commitment at that time, no matter what happens, at some point, we're going to have to move this into virtual reality. And then when COVID hit, we went, okay, this is it. This is our opportunity. Instead of being, thrown off by not being able to return to the bridge, we're going to leap into this new technology and have a bit of fun.
Is there like anything that changes from doing the public art piece to the VR piece? Like, are you losing anything? Are you gaining anything from switching the format?
Well, you're losing the collective experience. So, and that's big, because it used to be so much fun. Every night I go down under the bridge, it was like surfing. There'd be like, 1,000 people all reacting and turning and oohing and awing. And if some 9-year-old went off like a rocket over here and oohed and awed, everybody would, laugh and follow along. And it was wonderful. And so that's why we decided that we weren't just going to do something in virtual reality. We were going to take the VR goggles outside, which is absolutely verboten by the companies that you buy the headsets from. They say, you take these outside, you're going to destroy them. The light's going to destroy them, and you're not covered, and we're not guaranteeing it, and too bad, so sad. So we decided, just to make life difficult, we would take not 1 but 20 headsets outside and space them 6 feet apart on these spinning stools, and create an experience where 20 people would be seeing experiencing the same VR experience at the same time. And that was an attempt to keep a little of that extraordinary experience, community experience. And also it's really fun to have the VR headset on outside where everybody remarks about how they can feel the breeze. It's a sensual experience. And even though you're not underwater, it's appropriate as opposed to tucked away inside a room or a gallery somewhere. And then what's gained by going into virtual reality is you can do anything in virtual reality. Mm-hmm. So at some points, the bridge completely disappears, and it's really, really fun. It's a lot of work, and it requires a lot of work by fabulous wizards, not by myself, but our team was joined by terrific virtual reality artists who worked with myself and editor Michael Brockington to create it. So that was and it's been really interesting talking to people who came to the original show, some of them as many as 3 and 4 and 5 times. And they've come back to see it in VR and to see what their reactions are. And I talk with people a lot and kind of pick their brains and just get a sense of what was won, what was lost. Are we ahead? What's your favorite experience? It's been really fun. And it's been surprising because I was assuming, to be honest, assuming that the installation under the bridge would win hands down no matter what we did in VR. But it's not the case. That's been terrifically rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you can take this on the road to smaller communities to give them that experience. Is there, and then my other question is, would you have done this if it hadn't been for COVID? Or did that push you into the digital virtual reality world sooner?
It pushed us into it sooner, but we were definitely headed in that direction. So we were in the fortunate position of having a Canada Council grant, which it's referred to as a composite grant. So it allows you to map out what you're going to do for the next 3 years. In year 1, we were going to return to the bridge. In year 3, we were going to move into COVID. When COVID happened, we got back to the council and said, are you okay if we fast forward to step 3? And they were totally on board because it completely fell into their mandate. And we said, we'll create a COVID safe event outdoors, everybody 6 feet apart, and then explore as artists. So that was great. We were in such a fortunate position because so many of my colleagues were just left high and dry throughout this period. But in fact, we just went into fast forward. And it allows us to do exactly what you're saying. What we're really hoping is that the tour throughout the Lower Mainland is basically a pilot project to see what are the costs, what are the logistics of putting up our 20 headsets and having this, and can we bring it to Ladysmith? Can we bring it to Montreal? Can we bring it to London? We've had inquiries from throughout Asia. You know, this is initially we got inquiries to take the projected show, and we looked at it really, really seriously, but it was a nightmare. It was like it is a site-specific piece that was tailor-made for the bridge. And I went to China with Conalina, which was a feature documentary that I did around the same time. And while I was there, the Chinese were really, really interested because they're so into spectacle in the projected piece. And I'm running around trying to find, a bridge. It was crazy. Of course they got bridges, but they're entirely different. And as soon as it's different by this much, it's different by this much. And you're into a huge re-edit, basically. And so after giving it a real try, we realized, no, that's nuts. You have to embrace the fact that its power was that it's site specific, and come up with something where its power is that it's very, very nimble. And that's where it's taken us to VR, which is terrific. And it's been fun. By taking it outside and having 20 people looking all weird and sci-fi in the goggles and watching it, then you have other members of the public, especially if you're able to hold it in a place where there's a lot of foot traffic. And then you end up with people coming who had no idea that morning that they were even going to have a VR headset on their head, let alone be taken into the world that we had created for that headset. And that has been, it's one of the true, it's one of the most fulfilling things of creating true public art. And to that end, what we've been doing is we've been finding partners who will pay for it up front so that the audience doesn't have to pay for it. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big believer in that, after years of projecting stuff in cinemas, and I'm not taking away from the cinemas at all, but, cinemas are part of our popular culture, and that it kind of makes sense. But when you start getting into installations and that kind of artwork, I think galleries should be free, and I think that public art should be very public, very low threshold, so that people can fall into it, where you don't have something where if it, costs $20 a pop in your family of 4, they're not going to walk in the door. So it's public art, I think, is where it's at. So it would be great to travel to your neck of the woods. So let us know if you're interested.
Can I have a follow-up question?
Please.
Okay. I love the idea that you're saying that public art should be free, because I completely agree with that. And it needs to be not only free, but really accessible. And that's how we get people involved. The Ladysmith Waterfront Gallery and Art Council just released some of our survey results saying that the GDP in Canada is $927 billion for art. That's how much people are spending on it, where sports is like 600 million. So there's, or billions. So, you know, it tells me that art needs to be out there, but it is so little recognized.
Yeah.
You know, it drives me crazy that they're watering the baseball fields and we're in a school. So, you know, and we're open all the time. And I would love it if there was some way that we could get you to come here, because I'm pretty sure that, I know that we don't have many people today, but this is such a valuable conversation. I think it'd be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it takes, of course, somebody has to pay for it.
Absolutely.
That has to be either government or philanthropic money, one or the other, or both. And therein, of course, lies the rub. But if it's possible for us to get, you know, community-based art organizations to help us do that in community after community, we'll be able to come up shortly by the end of the tour with a price tag as to how much it costs per week. And it's not cheap, but I think it's worth it, you know. And the whole idea too is to, like, it was really interesting. We've shown in 3 places so far in the Lower Mainland, with the 4th one coming up. One of them is at the Museum of Vancouver. Absolutely beautiful location on their patio looking out over the water. Beautiful and you know, relatively quiet. So it's really, really lovely. But the walk-by traffic is pretty much zero. So what happens is when you put up a free piece, you work so hard to do this. We had a massive response, sold out. But we also had a massive no-show rate. And so there we were in this perfect location. And sometimes, you know, 25% just decided, honey, not tonight. And they didn't let us know, right? So we had no time to reach into our massive waiting list. We've got 400 people on the waiting list right now. We had no time to trigger those people. So it was very, very frustrating to be looking at empty seats, especially when you can only have 20 seats, you know, and then all of a sudden, you know, 5 of them are empty, right? Then we moved to the Shipyards Commons in North Vancouver. So at the foot of Lonsdale. I don't know if you've been there. It's amazing. And it is, I walked in and went, man, this is a zoo. Like that, it's hard surfaces. There's a lot of clatter and sound, but it's because it's really used, right? So there's a water park, which they very kindly turned off for our shows. There's kids on skateboards. There's a ping pong tournament over here. There's restaurants. There's the long quay that goes out into the water, and people really come to linger, to hang out, to have a cup of coffee. So when we put up our headsets, at first I thought, oh, the sound is going to bleed through, and it's, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It did. But the big plus is that when we had our no-shows, we had a huge cast of characters. And it was really interesting. I never thought in my wildest dreams this would happen. But a whole bunch of seniors have been turning up to our shows, most of whom had never had a VR headset on their heads. Like, we're having to give instructions, you know, take your hearing aids out. Yes, you can keep your distance glasses on. No, if they're readers, all this kind of stuff. And they're tripping on it. And the other big demographic is 9-year-olds, right? Really youngsters hauling their family. You don't just get one 9-year-old. You usually get a 9-year-old, a sibling, and 2 parents, right? And so we would end up with this terrific drop-in rate. And it was that scene of these 20 headsets turning, twisting in the wind that really piqued people's interest. Now you're cooking in terms of public art. Now you're reaching people who never go to the Polygon Gallery, which is a fantastic gallery 100 feet to the side, right? It's thrilling. Has to be covered. The space has to be outdoors and covered, but it works like crazy. Like crazy. Yeah.
I do have a question that kind of, does relate to like the movie theater, which is, like how you were sort of, like a lot of your films started out with like dialogue and characters and following their lives, and then you've moved into like films made specifically to view on the internet, or films that are public art installations, are moving into advancing technologies. And how has advancing technology, how has social media, how has not being in the movie theater like reframed how you think about art?
Well, I was headed there anyway. I didn't need a pandemic. None of us needed a pandemic. But the reason why I was headed there was because I think I felt very strongly that, as an artist, there's this wonderful saying that the Hopis have, and that's that in life, and I would say in art, what you have to do is continually leap off that cliff into the unknown. And they say, on your way down, you build your wings. And I kind of rejig that saying to saying, on that cliff is my entire crew. And together we leap off that cliff, and together we build our wings. And it's about that leap into the unknown. I think it's if you're not leaping into the unknown in some way when you're creating art, then you're not surprising yourself. And you have to, because you have to first surprise yourself in order to surprise the audience. And so you can do that with a movie. I mean, I think Conalina was a part of that leap. I would say all my films have in their own modest way. I've attempted to make that leap. But let me tell you, this kind of move more into the abstract has been my personal leap. And so that's been both in terms of the framing, where as a documentary filmmaker, the abstract, the way I define it, is framing the familiar in an unfamiliar way. Why? Not because I want to be artsy-fartsy or obtuse, but rather going back to that essential element, I want to surprise. And, when we're on location and we're really pushing ourselves as artists, one of the rules that we had with filming both Conalina and Uninterrupted was if we were framing something that looked like a still photograph out of a beautiful British Columbia magazine, we'd cut. And if it looked like an abstract oil, we'd roll. Mm-hmm. And again, it's because of that surprise. And when you're on location, you can feel it when you're doing it. It's so thrilling, where you're going, oh, like I've never seen this before. Well, if that happens to you, there's a chance it'll happen to your audience. And that also goes with the form. So, getting away from, a single 16:9 frame on a great, big, beautiful screen and a lovely sound system. I still love it, and I'm still going to make movies. But to move onto a bridge now, that was a jump. And all of a sudden, we're making fish swim across a bridge. And it's very exciting. It makes technology, instead of being just terrifying, and it is terrifying for me because I love being behind a camera. I love framing. I think I have quite a nice eye. I tend to shoot a certain portion of all my films, but I'm not a dope. I have fabulous cinematographers who really deliver the goods. And part of that's because the technology defeats me easily. I get very frustrated. I'm not a techie. You know, my crew always laughs at me. I walk into a room and computers shut down. It's just kind of my vibe. But my role is to be a very kind of privileged kind of traffic cop in a way, and be able to work with this extraordinary team of artists, and to move into new technology. It's kind of the joke on the crew that, you know, somebody who, like me, who is where technology can get the better of me like that, moving into what we call with Uninterrupted bleeding edge technology, because it's difficult and it's expensive in terms of time and all the rest of it. It's not without its ironies, but it is because our whole team is just pushing ourselves and being thrilled by it. And it's so cool, you know, I mean, this technology in particular, virtual reality, it's kind of in the it's in the sphere of gamers. That's where it's really flourishing. And similarly, when we were doing the digital projection, digital mapping, you know, it's in the ballpark of people who have a heck of a lot of money. It tends to be very, very commercial. So you'll have like Prada or something hosting a projection. They tend to be kind of big and kind of cheesy. But the actual technology itself, there's real magic and poetry there. And so it's really wonderful to work with these real magicians and say, you know, we're not selling a handbag, but if you work with us, and we're not going to be able to give you that kind of, you know, the kind of money that the big animation houses can give you, but you want to make some art? And you end up getting these fabulous talents who really, really go with the distance for you. And it's thrilling. It's the, you know, it's wonderful. You know, at my age, I'm 69, and to say that I'm at, you know, the latest project is the creative ride of a lifetime. It's a wonderful place to be. And I got to say, I've always been proud and excited by all my projects. So it's not like I've come out, there's not one project where I've gone, oh, you know, too bad, so sad it didn't work out, or where we were working for some kind of, we were producing something for somebody else, you know, creating some kind of widget. So I'm a very lucky filmmaker in that way.
Yeah, and I just love that you talk so kindly about your crew, because I'm always worried in film, like it can be so unethical, you know, it can be so unempathetic, and that leads me into how you like all your films, whether it be shooting animals or land or people, they don't pass any judgment on anyone, and how do you do that?
Well, it comes from a really it's grown, but it was always there, and it's a deep-seated commitment to asking, what the devil is my role? Like, what the hell are you doing here? And I really, really had to ask that for my more, people called them political films. I called them high-stakes human dramas. But, you know, I would be in the middle of a revolution somewhere, and you had to ask yourself, Nettie, what the hell are you doing here? You know, waving a camera around in the middle of a situation where people's lives are on the line, and asking them to be vulnerable in front of your camera, really vulnerable, like showing their faces, and then not having any control of the edit afterwards. These are show-stopping questions when you ask yourself, what the hell are you doing? And the answer was hard come by, but with each one of them, it was to really take a look at my role. And my role was not to tell anybody in any revolution whether or not they should be picking up that gun and fighting that fight, or any fisherman as to whether or not he should or she should not be fishing. It was rather to bring a curious lens rather than a judgmental one, and burrow into the complexity rather than make overly simplified propaganda. Or, you know, I mean, nobody in the world really cares what Nettie Wild thinks about any given subject. You know, why should, it's the people in front of the lens, or the fish. These are the important characters. So what's happened is that more and more I've seen, especially in these controversial times, and they are getting more and more controversial, my role is not to wag my finger and tell people what to think. I mean, who gives a damn what I think, right? But rather find the poetry in every single person or thing or animate or beast in front of my lens, knowing that really good poetry has elements of darkness as well as light. So that's what allows you to go into the contradictions in a highly conflicted situation. And it allows you to see the different parts of a story. And with Conolina, you know, we were in an area that is probably has the biggest gold mines in the world, and huge and massive, beautiful territory that's under extraordinary tumult and change. And it was for me to find that poetry, that complex, contradiction-riddled poetry of every single person in front of our lens, whether that was a diamond driller, or whether that was an elder who was hunting, or whether that was a diamond driller who was First Nations, whose grandfather was protesting against him, and find the poetry of these people. And similarly, when we made Uninterrupted, I can't tell you how many people came up and said, you know, you've got to include fish farming, you've got to include overfishing, you have to include the commercial fleet, you have to fish slice, you name it. And every single one of those topics is really important. But I had to go back to that question. So Nettie, what is your role? What are you doing here? And there's a lot of people who can do terrific investigative journalism or research science into all those questions. That's not me. But my job and our crew's job was to make art. To make art that was, that captured in with Uninterrupted the wonder of those fish. And what's extraordinary is that there is wonder in the death that's involved in a migration. So we had to find the grotesque and the sublime side by side. That's the poetry. That's where the poetry is. So it's not a matter of, you know, getting rid of the dying fish because they're inconveniently ugly and stinky, and so stinky that when you step out of the car, you almost faint, right? Because there's a million dead carcasses on the beach. So once I got over that, and then we got into, not only are they extraordinary to look at, but they're easy to film because they're still. So we got into their eyes and their scales and these amazing sculptures of dead fish that would pile up because the current would make these incredible underwater sculptures that are weird and wonderful. And, you know, kids look at it and go, ooh, that's okay. And so it was up to us to deliver the wonder of that, and in the hopes that we could reach out and pull in people who never went to an environmental meeting and didn't go to environmental films, and just got completely hooked, at the risk of overworking a metaphor, and pulled into something, and they're going, holy smokes. And, you know, they tell their buddy at the bar afterwards, you got to come see this. You've got to. And then who knows where the conversation goes after that, but there will be one. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not for me to control it, but, you know, I really feel that in these increasingly controversial times that there's an enormous debate going on, which is polarizing us. And if, as a person, as a small community like Ladysmith, as a province, as a country, as a world, we're going to have to pull off this massive paradigm shift to deal with climate change, we can't be screaming at each other and throwing rhetoric at each other and making stuff that, say, a fisherman would be frightened to come to for fear of being maligned, right? We can't do that. We can't afford it. So again, I think art can break through that that rhetoric.
And is part of your choice not to use, because in Roundup and in Uninterrupted you don't use narration, is that one of the reasons why?
We're making another piece called Go Fish, which is going to be focusing on the herring spawn, and it's being shot closer to you guys up in the Salish Sea, up in between Hornby, Denman, and Vancouver Island. And there we're focusing on, the theme is the herring, when they spawn, set the table, and who comes to dinner. And of course there's a plethora of sea lions, billions of birds, seals, you name it, and the fishing fleet. And we're filming not just underwater, amazing fish footage with the sea lions, but also topside with drones. And the patterns of that fishing fleet are amazing. And I think that we will hear some voices. One of the questions that I loved asking people is, when's the spawn going to happen? And everybody has a theory, right? And so that's a nice texture. It's like music. And actually, Uninterrupted does have a voice in it. It has the voice of Mary Thomas, who's a Secwepemc elder, and she's actually telling a story in Secwepemc about the salmon, and we just use it like music. So, you know, there's not a huge amount of our audience who can speak Secwepemc. It doesn't matter. She's the tone of it. She's like the spirit of the river. So I think it's not that I'm adverse to using the human voice, but well, let me tell you, there's a real liberation not dealing with sync sound. and while we were filming we've filmed the last three seasons of the herring spawn. And, you know, all the news crews have been out there, and all the activists, and they're all getting interviews and making statements. And I'm just so relieved that I'm not doing that. And, you know, a lot of their work is important. I think everybody has a place on this spectrum. But there is a certain samey feeling to a lot of that stuff. And so I think we've managed to find a way of breaking out of that. And I know that lots of people come to Uninterrupted who are, you know, uninitiated, and they think they're coming to like a lecture on the salmon cycle, and then we blow their minds, and that's really fun. Mind you, there was one guy the other night came, and he said he was really upset and took off his headset and said, "I didn't think this was going to be so arty." He said, I was here for a lecture. So you can't please everybody all the time.
I was just kind of wondering, for people who are, you know, are looking at storytelling through film, are there things that they need to maybe think about or you know, prior to maybe working on a film or creating a film, no matter how small it is? Is there things that they might benefit from knowing from you, from your experience working in this industry? Are there things that they might want to consider as they set, you know, a pace into filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, that sort of thing?
Well, I think one of the things that's really exciting about documentary filmmaking, I found, if you bring a curious lens instead of a judgmental heart, you can, real life presents you with the kind of colors and textures and wonders and rhythms that you could never make up. And so it's been really interesting when we've been working in virtual reality, while many of my other colleagues who are working in that milieu are animators and are creating stuff from scratch, and there's some absolutely beautiful stuff that's being done by them, but or doing drama. But one of the things that I've really noticed is that the nuance, the surprise, it's very, very hard, especially as a beginning filmmaker, to pull that out of thin air. But real life, it's all around you. If you can see what I refer to as the repeated action of real life. And that's where the poetry is. So I would say it's a very simple rule. And I wish somebody had mentioned it to me when I first got started. But it's this. Life has its rhythms and habits and patterns. And if you can look around you, and no matter what kind of a film you want to make, say you wanted to do a piece of investigative journalism, or say you wanted to do something that was very, very abstract, whatever it is, whoever you're following or whatever, first of all, it's got to have movement if you're making a movie. If it doesn't have movement, then do a poem about it or take a still photograph. But the word movie is based on the word movement. And one of the things that was really interesting with Conalina was we decided that, sure, we'd interview people. We'd have that kind of in our hip pocket as a kind of texture, audio texture, but we would follow people who had some kind of repeated action that we could film from all sorts of different angles and then work with that. So as an example, there is a guy who's a horseshoer in it, and he was fantastic. And he was filming, when we filmed him, a string of 17 horses. Think about it. That's 17 times he's going to be shoeing 4 different feet. Took him 2 days. So what we did was, you could start with the wide shot. There's a horse and there's a horseshoer, and he's doing his thing, right? And then we started to move in closer and closer, and then started filming it in slow motion. And we started to notice this extraordinary poetry, that he wouldn't just take a hammer and place it in his other hand. Because he was so familiar with it, he would throw it. So in slow motion, we'd have these really beaten up, extraordinary hands, and he would throw the hammer in slow motion, and the other hand would catch it. And we had, the close-up of the horse's eyes as they would kind of turn around to see what was happening. And the repeated action of that sequence took us 2 days to shoot. We shot a huge amount of footage and then cut it into about a 4-minute sequence. And we interviewed him, and that's threaded through it together with a soundscape. And we were able to capture the poetry of this person through the repeated action. And that is a great, great place to start. And you start filming, this isn't just about filming, this is about storytelling. You tell what you know, stuff that's close by. But when you turn that kind of lens onto that kind of repeated action, and you're pushing yourself to frame the familiar in an unfamiliar way. Why? To surprise yourself, right? If you put those two things together, you'll have a blast and it will be successful, right? Doesn't matter if it's a minute long. You might spend, 10 weeks getting that minute right, but it's a fabulous, rich, textured world, and it gets you past stereotype. That's so important, because as soon as we all carry stereotypes with us, we can't help it. And that's the same thing. And if you're really, I'd really also encourage people to film people who will surprise them. Like, if you are involved in a controversial issue, think about the various different quote sides and go out of your way to really listen to people who perhaps you think are on the polar opposite side of the fence. People can sense, if you go in with a curious lens to somebody like that, they'll sense it. If you go in with a hidden, you really shouldn't be doing this anyway, they'll sense it. They'll sense it as fast as they can sense racism or sexism, right? But if you go in genuinely going, what do you do? Show me. How do you do it? And then you end up just in this wonderful, textured, complex place that might leave you scratching your head, which is perfect place to be.
Well, thank you so much for coming, Nettie. Like, I think we're all feel very inspired, and your work is incredible, and I'm just so grateful that I had the chance to talk to you. Thank you so much. And Kathy says, thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been exciting, and I appreciate your creating art and still excited doing it.
Great.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Thanks for the interest. And let's hope we can make it happen in Ladysmith.